Yeah, we're recording. Go for it.
Right. Man, why do I always have to go for it?
I can go for it, man. You
go
just
for
like
it, and I go for it after.
All right. Shut up.
Fucking go for it.
Welcome everybody to another MoCast episode, and if you've seen the title, today we have Shadow Priest, and actually this is one of the more interesting episodes since Marcel and I don't play that much Shadow in our
man. I love playing Shadow Priest. Whenever I get the chest, I loved it. And
when?
Yeah, in BFA month, I have footage. Listen, I always loved Shadow Priest. I loved playing Shadow Priest in MoB. That was the first time because I played Holy a lot in PvP, and then I switched a little bit to Shadow. That was the Shadow Orbs days and stuff. We're gonna talk about that, and I also played it in BFA. I love the spec, always did, but that's not what's important. What is important is who we're gonna chat about Shadow today, and we have first of all Mr. San, and second Mr. Publik. Now I'll let the boys talk a little bit about themselves so you can get an idea on who we're chatting, and then we can just jump straight into it. So
hey guys. I'm Sam, playing Shadow Priest since Vanilla and raiding since Burning Crusade, having my own guild since Cataclysm and raid leading for now 10 years and playing like every patch Shadow main forever.
And hey guys, my name is Publik. Those of you that play Shadow probably heard me from either the Discord. I also write the Icy Veins guide. I currently kind of run and maintain the Shadow Sim C module with some other folks, all the Shadow Sim stuff. And then I publish a bunch of things so people can somewhat figure out how to play the class, although these days it seems harder than ever, but we have fun with it. So
Pretty cool. So I do want to mention that, first of all, San is also one of our very first Patreons. He's been really supportive, for the channel and the streams for a very long time. And he has been our go-to source for anything Shadow related. Obviously that involved, getting into the Warcraft Priest Discord and getting a lot of feedback from there. But we're having here, I would guess, some iconic folks when it comes to Shadow Priest, and who better to talk about? And obviously Publik, as he put it, he's pretty known in the Shadow Priest community. There's no surprise. He brings a lot of light into the Shadow.
A much needed light. Stronger the light, the stronger the shadow. Isn't that what they say? But yeah, guys, we're gonna have a lot of links to Publik's YouTube channel and San's Twitch. I don't know if San still does YouTube or not, but everything will be down in the description in the video.
Definitely.
For now, let's actually start going into the Shadow discussion. So
let's go, baby.
Usually we start a little bit chill as to all right, guys, like how long? Well, we know that San played Shadow since TBC, but you guys can give us like a history of your Shadow experience, and maybe when you played the best iteration of Shadow in your view, like when you think it was the funnest, or maybe something that stood out for you guys. Let's start with Publik and go around.
Yeah, sure. So my journey into playing Shadow Priest actually kind of started with the rework that happened going into Legion. So I had always played Shadow as an alt, really like kind of like starting like Wrath or whatever, and then the Legion rework with Surrender to Madness, I think, drew myself and a lot of people into the spec, and that's just kind of when things took a wild turn for me, and that became my main ever since. I would say kind of outside of that, the most fun I've had, I actually really enjoyed playing Shadow in Warlords of Trainer as my kind of main alt with the kind of Shadow Orb playstyle. Like Blackrock Foundry as a Shadow Priest was a lot of fun, really enjoyed it. And then honestly, like, probably my most favorite time as Shadow is probably right now, if I'm being honest.
Oh shit, man! Shadowlands did something good.
The existing iteration of Shadow, I think, does a lot of really good things. I don't think it's by any means perfect. Like, it for sure has gaps or flaws, but I think it's a great going off from a spec. I did have fun in Legion with the crazy Surrender to Madness days, but I think everyone playing it back then knew that wasn't going to last very long. So. But I think this is a good happy medium in my opinion. So. Yeah.
All right, bringing some love to Shadowlands. That's gonna be controversial a little bit.
It's good. What about you, Sam?
Yeah, I'm actually not playing only Shadow for like that long, but maining it ever since. So it was the first character I ever played, or spec. And since Cataclysm, I'm like dabbling into like all specs. Well, not all, but 99% of it, and like reading a lot. And I feel like Shadow is the one spec that got like every 2 or 4 years like a totally overhaul or something totally new to it. And for me, it was perfect as a main because it was not like playing the same for like 10 years, because it was every time it was new. And I it's hard to say which one was the bad iteration, because the raids are important as well, and it's so hard to say because I have a lot of memories, like back in Cataclysm with the legendary staff from Firelands. It was such a great time when it procced and you get like you bursted out everyone. It was and also tier sets. I'm maybe that's like the only thing I don't like about Shadowlands right now, or like BFA. I think the tier sets made Shadow more fun every time, and I miss that so much.
Oh, you're gonna get him, San. 9.2 confirmed.
Yeah, soon TM, right?
We'll see. We'll definitely see. I mean, I can see, because before recording, I was talking a little bit with Publik, and remember back in the Shadowlands alpha things, they were reading forums and Reddits and stuff. There were like 3 major camps, right? Before the rework, you know, the whole hype behind the rework, and there was the Shadow Orbs fellas, right? There was the Insanity fellas, not the Surrender to Madness, but you know, the Legion part where Publik was mentioning. And there was the BFA version, more or less, right? But you know, the ideas. So I want to get a little bit into, I would say first off, the Shadow Orbs mechanic, because a lot of people seem to really be, I don't know, nostalgic about it, or really want it back, or something like that. Maybe you guys can clear the air on, is it really worth bringing that back? Why is this happening? Why are people still like clinging on to that?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of what San actually mentioned about the kind of nostalgia around the time when Shadow had a certain playstyle, and then whatever was happening in the game at the time, right? So I think if you go back to like WoD era when we had Shadow Orbs, I feel like everyone had an orb mechanic, right? Like combo points, Mistweaver, like monks had their chi, right? Like everyone had some kind of point generation system.
Yep.
And I feel like every time you changed an alt, it was like, oh yeah, this is just another point system. So I never really liked that. It didn't really feel unique in that sense whenever Shadow Orbs was a thing, because a lot of people had them. Now that being said, I actually would argue that the current iteration, while it's obviously not called Shadow Orbs, the existing mechanic we have today, which is building Insanity and then spending it in chunks, is effectively the same thing as Shadow Orbs, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
In a world where we have Devouring Plague, it's cost 50 Insanity, that means you need 25. You know, if you think about it, you have 2 orbs to get there, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? In a way, it's actually pretty similar. They just tied the Insanity mechanic to it to make it a little bit more fluid.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think it's kind of an interesting take on the spec, because, you know, you're never going to satisfy everyone as a game developer. If Shadowlands has taught us anything, it's that.
Sure.
You know, there's always going to be people that are, you know, hard disagree in the direction you're going, or people want it in this kind of direction. What I like about Shadow right now is I think it's approachable enough for people that want to get into it, but it has a lot of depth if you're someone like me that really likes to min-max the playstyle. And I think almost most importantly, it's pretty versatile, probably the most versatile it's been in a long time. And even that's not, you know, in the grand scheme of things, not the most versatile that I'd like it to be, but, you know, we actually changed talents again, which is fun and exciting.
Sure.
Sometimes we have lots of legendary choices. We can actually pick any covenant we want right now. And I think like all of those decisions, I think kind of play into the spec, and there are different choices you can make based on that. And I think that's inherently a great design in addition to the base spec. So that's why I really enjoyed it. And I think the developer that made the current iteration, while he's no longer at Blizzard, I think he was really harking back to what people liked about Shadow Orbs, what people liked about older talents or builds or tier sets even, and trying to bake them in a way that made it feel approachable and not broken. Because, you know, while Shadow does really good damage right now, I wouldn't say it's anywhere in like a broken state. Like, it's not overpowered. And, you know, there weren't a lot of Shadow Priests in the world first race.
Although broken or...
Yeah, you know, Convoke or other things like that is a little bit different, right? But while Shadow is like certainly dominating single target, it's never like, oh yeah, stack 15 Shadow Priests in your raid, right? Like, no one does that.
Yeah.
So
that was never like the case, right? Single target, like being that good.
Yeah, which is fun. I love it.
It feels weird though when I'm used to not. I actually feel it's very similar to the Shadow Orbs playstyle, like you mentioned, because it's like happen on the same time frames, kind of, right? It is a different source, what you can see and stuff, and it's like generating differently. But when I remember right, Shadow Orbs have 2 iterations, right? The one where you get it randomly when you channel Mind Flay, and the one where you get it guaranteed when you cast Mind Blast.
Yeah.
and might spike also. And I felt like this time right now felt like a lot like the Mindblast Spike playstyle from I believe it was Dreno, and I liked Dreno a lot because it was very consistent, and I hate randomness too much, which was like sometimes Legion with the can you raise like 70 stacks of Void Form and you're like going insane God mode or not, and well. Don't forget, like the first rate here, right? Where you are like 30-40% more ahead than everyone else because you're like being 2-3 minutes in the void form, and it's hard for me to say which one I like more. I need a bit more time on that, but it feels very similar to me from what I played before.
Yeah, and I think one of the big pieces of feedback that I was kind of hounding on in alpha and beta was, you know, while Legion and BFA certainly had points where it was really fun to play, the range on what it could do was massive, right? So put it, you know, if you go back to videos of like Vicklin doing amazing Surrender to Madness videos where he's just dominating, right?
Yeah.
But that range of like the casual player or the heroic raider even is massive. The spike difference is crazy. And that's because you really need to be really good at the game to get good output from it.
I actually think they also changed it because leveling was like so fucking tedious.
Oh yeah, leveling is terrible.
That was so crazy.
But now that it's a cooldown spec, effectively, right? We have void form at a minute and a half.
Almost everyone else, right?
Minutes. Yeah, which, you know, that part I can understand people weren't psyched about being a cooldown spec because before we weren't really. But now it's way less punishing of a spec, right? You can go into an encounter, you can handle a mechanic while you're not doing your cooldowns, and you won't lose all of your damage for the next minute and a half, which is how it was for most of BFA, right? If you got any mechanic, your damage was just screwed for the next minute.
Like Shriek Ring, right, where you cannot attack the boss for a time period. I hated it so much, yeah.
So I think it makes the spec easier to pick up because of that. Again, it's less punishing, and I think it makes it, personally, I think it's more fun progressing in that because I'm not like dreading getting mechanics as much as I used to, right?
I like it more, but it's not there where it could be.
It definitely, you can tell that there are some parts that are not, they don't have the polish or they're not complete, but I think, you know, and I play a lot of specs too in the game. I've made weak orders for every spec in the game, so I try to kind of understand how things work, and honestly, I really struggle to have fun on other specs in the game right now because I think they have way more problems than Shadow does, but you know, that's just my perspective.
Yeah, it's a hard topic. Yeah, I feel that way too. I'm like swapping every 3 or 4 weeks my ult because I'm like exhausted.
Yeah, and I'm also tired of picking Night Fae in my ults. So.
Oh my god, I hate Night
So it's not just us, man.
There is no chance, right? I hope for the legendaries to be like a direction away from Night Fae.
We can talk about that. I got some fun news on that.
Oh, definitely. We're going to.
But you know, I was just gonna say, do you think we should just leave and let these boys talk?
Yeah, they should have
a good time.
A pretty good vibe going on.
I love it.
We're definitely gonna touch on the 9.1 as well. Or we can
let's just jump into it.
Yeah, let's actually talk. I actually looked at a couple of the priest legendaries because I think 2 of them are not yet confirmed.
2 were on the PTR.
So we technically have all 4, but only 2 are confirmed.
Yeah. Well, I would like to just get into it because I know you have a lot of information public, but I was curious on what you think about the Ventir one. Let's start it off with that.
They're all terrible.
Okay, guys, thank you. See you next time.
That was it.
You know, fortunately, or I'll say unfortunately, going into Shadowlands launch, the developer that worked on Shadow and did the rework left Blizzard. And I think you can clearly see that since then they've kind of struggled with what to do with this spec. Because, you know, they essentially passed on the work to someone else, right? And these legendaries look definitely like a healer main made them, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but they are Covenant legendaries, so it is kind of disappointing. But yeah, early results actually put the Ventir legendary as a slight DPS loss.
Really?
For Shadow Priest. The Night Fae legendary is almost a DPS loss, basically inconsequential, which is kind of sad to see. Obviously, we can do some tweaks here and there, but you know, it's like 7 or 8% behind already.
Okay.
So, and you know, part of that becomes a thing of, you know, as a disciplined priest, right? Getting an extra mind games charge is massive, right? You get 2 mind games in your atonement burst window. Like, that spirit shell, like that's awesome.
Yep.
And I can
For
see how that's a
PvP
lot of
as
fun.
well, right?
For PvP,
PvP as well. Yeah, exactly. Even though the cast time increased, but yeah, PvP as well. And the problem is that benefit just doesn't translate into PvE. It just doesn't do enough damage, right? The only time where I could see, you know, maybe it made sense is you would get 2 charges for every Sludge Fist pillar if you can time it out right. Could be kind of cool, but it doesn't do that much damage for us.
Yeah.
So
What
it's
about
kinda
the Necrolords one? Because I always thought
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you
so
have
the-
Sims for that, man?
No, unfortunately, yeah. So the 2 that were data mined, and there's a reason why they were just data mined. We looked at the spell data for them, and it's very much incomplete. So it's kind of hard, and we can't test it in PTR. So it's kind of hard to see where their vision is with it or what the tuning is going to be around it. So unfortunately, Necrolord, I really have no idea how it's going to work. There's no way to
Sounds
test it.
pretty
'cause
cool,
we-
though.
It could be interesting. My only concern is it's a pet, and you know, anyone that's played Shadow knows that Mindbender and Shadow Fiend are exactly the most intelligent beings on the earth. So I'm a little scared about
All
that.
pets in game are important.
Yeah, so that part kind of scares me a little bit. But you know, the problem is the Necrolord one won't change how you play at all. Which I think for me, and I'm not a game designer, but my barrier for Legendary is it needs to change what you're doing, right? I think Shadowflame Prison
That's
is a
fair.
great example of that.
You
know-
remember the 4 set from Nighthold? Where you
Is that
have,
the
like-
machine gun?
Yeah.
Void Bolt machine gun? Yeah.
It's so simple, right? But it felt like so fucking good. It's
Exactly.
hard to
It doesn't need to be complicated by any means. So the Necrolord one, we'll see. Kind of boring though. The Kyrian one, I will say, looks kind of interesting. The tooltip breed's kind of weird, and the way they read it is weird. But the Kyrian one that's been data mined turns Kyrian Shadow Priest into a 2-minute spec,
Yep.
down from a 3-minute spec.
I don't like Boon of Descendant. I don't. That isn't.
Yeah, very few people like Boon of the Ascended, which is the problem. And I think this is really interesting because as a theory crafter and sim person, right, for the community, Kyrian has almost always been the top sending Shadow Priest Covenant, like since beta. But
On the
there's-
measurement, right?
yeah, but there's like
could
3
put up
people
there.
that went Kyrian. Like no one chose Kyrian.
Yeah.
And I, you know, for a variety of reasons. right?
Hey
But-
man, I played my priest on Kyrian.
Yeah, your discipline. That's actually something that I kind of felt when going into the Shadowlands beta when first I tested Boon on Shadow. I think initially it didn't even generate Insanity, right? And then they might have realized that, wait a minute, it kind of has to generate some form of Insanity.
At first with the old playstyle, right? You're losing insanity and draining out of it.
And it felt a little bit weird because I feel as a Shadow Priest, at least as an average Shadow Priest, I feel like, okay, I'm going into this form and I'm going to explode in damage, and kind of Boon takes me out of it. So sure, numbers might be
counterproductive for
good.
sure,
yeah, and it takes me like, okay, it kind of makes sense for Discipline and maybe Holy as well, because it kind of acts like an extra cooldown
But
for
discipline is really good.
healing and potentially damage as well. But for Shadows, like, I mean, it's not shadowy. Do you need that?
Yeah, it definitely feels misplaced, I would say. And also, if folks didn't know, I know a lot of people don't pay attention to Kyrian anymore. They actually removed the insanity component from the spell.
Oh, they did.
Yeah, I don't know why.
It lines up with PI, right? So maybe that's something.
But yeah, so with this legendary, it'll make Boon of the Ascended line up with PI. Because right now, you're in this kind of awkward state with Boon of the Ascended because if you want to time it with everything, you're kind of like a 3-minute spec. Whereas all the other covenants right now are a 2-minute spec, more or less. Or shorter with Night Fae. So, you know, this, and the Sims are showing it looks okay on single target. Although, you know, the only thing that makes Kyrian worthwhile is the Soulbinds. Pelagos to the Soulbind is just so overpowered and broken that it'll bump everything up. So it's hard to kind of say what that looks like. But yeah, Boon's just really strange, especially in the current iteration of Shadow Priest where you're kind of bursting your cooldown window for that first, you know, whatever X seconds of the fight. You kind of don't have free globals. Like, you always have something you want to be doing. And the problem with inserting Boon of the Ascended in there is that's just a lot of globals that you're giving up something else to cast, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, you could be casting more Mind Blast, you could be casting another Devouring Plague or Void Bolt, right? We have a lot of things to do on kind of relatively short cooldowns. So weaving in Ascended Blast and whatever makes the spec harder to play and harder to master, I guess I'd say, for sure. And in my opinion, less fun. I think a lot of people will agree with that, but yeah.
Yeah,
This is the hard spot, right? When it's challenging and you get a reward out of it, it's okay. But when it's less fun,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, at this point, we talked about the situation with Covenant legendaries in most of our previous podcasts. They have to make these legendaries to be able to compete with the current legendaries. A lot of these specs are rocking with, because these that are affecting like more or less, your playstyle, your individual playstyle for your spec is, I don't know, maybe theory crafting wise, as Publik said, maybe Boon will probably be ahead or something. But it's exactly the argument you made, my man. If it doesn't feel right, and it surely doesn't feel right at Shadow, if you have to like spam in all of those Boon of the Ascended things, while you could be casting a Mind Blast, you could be pressing on a Devouring
You're
Blade
just
or
not
whatever.
playing Shadow, then you're just playing like a totally different spec.
You're a Kyrian priest, not a shadow.
Why not having like the old demon form that you have on Warlock and something cool like that, where you have like, I don't know, higher range, or you can move while channeling or something?
Yeah,
There
literally
could-
anything.
there's So
Yeah.
much potential for being a great spec, but
We'll get to there, Sam. We have
I know
a special zone
what
for
you're
that.
thinking.
Yeah, we'll get
I
to
think,
that.
like, honestly, with my critique on this, and this is more of a critique on Shadowlands system design, their target for legendaries is 5%. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what they said.
They want legendaries to be 5% power, and that's all like well and good, I think, from an outset. But the problem is that's really hard to do in practice. Like, how do you change a spec meaningfully that like changes your gameplay, and it's only 5%? Like,
Yeah.
like that's hard. It's either gonna be broken, like the balance tree of the legendary has been, or it's
that's
gonna
fun,
be
right? It's also fun.
yeah, or it's gonna be terrible. It's gonna be like 2%, like one of the Shadowpriest legendaries that we have, Painbreaker Psalm, right? And I think like that balance is really difficult, especially when we have 5 other sources of borrowed power this expansion, right? So you're combining legendary power that could interact good or bad with a soulbind, or good or bad with a conduit, and then God help them adding tier sets. I'm terrified of adding tier sets.
I was
And another one.
I was actually thinking about that because and this is an interesting topic with the Covenant legendaries. You actually hit the nail on the head.
Nailed the
Public,
coffin on the hammer. All right.
Soulbinds, for most specs, at least from what research we've done, Soulbind seems to be a bigger power source than the Covenant abilities for certain specs.
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit weird to add a legendary that alters a Covenant ability, because then, okay, so you want it to be a 5% whole player power, but if the Covenant ability is basically more or less like what you have for Warlocks with Soul Rod, it doesn't really matter. You just want the bonus of the mastery, and more or less with Pelagos as well, you just pop your like real ideally short Covenant ability for a bunch of mastery. If you buff like an underwhelming Covenant ability with a legendary, unless it's like, okay, wow, okay, I feel like I'm actually pressing whatever, it doesn't really make for a lot of intriguing gameplay.
Yeah, for sure.
They're in a very weird situation, right? They like developed over the years such great mechanics. Sometimes they hit and miss, of course, but now they're in the space when they reuse something that we really liked. Everyone hates on them because they're like recycling that, and when they're introducing something new, everyone hates it because it's bad, right? There's not enough design space for coming up with very intelligent ideas every fucking time. And
True.
I don't know, I want old tier sets back, something that I really liked, and I'm fine with that. It doesn't matter if it's recycled or not.
I think that's kind of where I would disagree a little bit, in the sense that there's a big design space right now that's kind of unused, and that's talents, right? How many specs right now have dead talents? How
Oh,
many of
yes.
them have
Yeah,
half of their
we're
talents
lucky
are
on
dead,
that. We're lucky
right?
on that, yeah.
And I would say, I'm not saying they should necessarily buff all of those, but maybe they're dead because everyone hates playing with it, or they're not fun, or they don't work with the spec, right?
Old talent tree, or what are you saying?
I don't know. I'm just saying that it's weird putting new design spaces into elements of the game that will go away next expansion. I would rather than spend that dev time making really, really fun talent choices.
It's working for nothing also, right? I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's a time waste.
Yeah. So I don't know.
That's-
It's difficult. It's just, but there's so many like different slots of power in our characters, and I think
Yeah.
to make them all interesting is very difficult. And I posted this earlier too, but like on your point, Soulbinds right now, Soulbind traits plus conduits is roughly 20% of our player power right now. That's insane.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
That's almost unprecedented for one system in a game to be that large of a percent of our power this early on. And yeah, it's going to create some, I will tell you, it will create some weirdness going forward.
That's like the item level difference from 200 to 220 when you believe Ian, right?
Yeah, there you go. That's a normal.
That's
I
really
see.
crazy.
Yeah.
So we're playing like 2-4-6 or something when we're 2-2-6 with scope. Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
That they did say that the eye level should be like a 1% incremental increase in par for each eye level point, although if it is actually that, it remains to be seen. And obviously after the interview with Preach, they kind of announced, I don't know if begrudgingly or they were planning on slowly removing a little bit of the external player power from systems. Because we've obviously been talking with a bunch of people about this, like external systems and all of that, and how do you balance 36 specs if every expansion you would have to add new spells. All right, but then again, you keep adding things to specs because people want something new. People want to feel like, oh, I'm playing Shadowlands and now I have this. I have, okay, let's say Surrender to Madness. I have Surrender to Madness, right? But then you take it away. So this is like an ongoing roller coaster of like, okay, I'm getting something, I'm losing something. I'm getting something, I'm losing something. And I feel like, but the way that the player systems, the power systems have worked so far, at least starting with BFA, because I think in Legion you just had everything except legendaries. Access to like all of it at the same time. You swap in between them. You swap between Essences and Azerite. You swap between Conduits and Soulbinds. Not as much between Covenants. But you kind of swap between them like you would talents, right? They just seem like they're the talents that we're gonna lose, but with a different name and with a different restriction that's just a little bit annoying because they have to feel different. So I feel like, I don't know, maybe if they move, then maybe we can actually talk a little bit more about the talents of Shadowpriest and how they function right now off of this. But the way they kind of move into it is that I feel like they could just bake all of this into talents, because Sand pointed out earlier that all talent trees, although I'm not sure if that would still work unless they devise like at least an interesting approach to, like, I wouldn't say Path of Exile, but I guess Path of Exile is the example that maybe most people would understand, where there's branches everywhere and you can just diverse the playstyle. But that seems incredibly
I don't know, for
bad
MMO,
to balance.
yeah, that's...
So I hate it a lot on the talent system that we have now, because it just feels so simple and so streamlined. But if you keep adding rows and all of these abilities that they don't want to add because we're just going to end up with 100 spells, if they just make them choices instead of something that you permanently have in your spellbook, that might alleviate the clots in the spellbook that would create.
I actually would like if they do something they done PvP, right? Where you have like a selection of like 15 or something traits and you can like pick 5 or something. That would be more fun if you have like rows. Maybe it's harder to design or to balance, but as you're saying, when you put more to it, you don't increase the number you can use, but you have more options, for example, for niche situations. And like figuring out some situations where you can use that would be really fun, because I think they're like trying to create a perfect system, but without like solve the problems that they had, and like inventing the wheel every time. They don't have to do that. Like sorting out everything and then like keep going, adding stuff, and maybe removing when you feel it's too much, but not like having like 50% of the game go away every time. It's not like, why you say that? Like when 10% is too much, put 10% away. Why you say 50% every time? I don't understand that.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting is I would actually argue we kind of have the old talent tree in the game right now. It's just not where you see it. So soulbind traits, right? Soulbind traits are all boring and terrible. No one knows what they do. They're just passive increases to your damage, right? Do the same thing with Azerite traits before. And I think it just feels like the game, our power is almost wasted on these aspects that are just so boring, and like you just don't notice that they're there, but they are significant. And those used to be the little in-between rows,
the passives,
the cool spells on the talent trees, right?
Yeah.
But now they've just split it out into 5 different systems.
Yeah, well, we have also like a lot of passive stuff, right?
Exactly.
Like over the expansions, they saw that works fine. We give them that passive, and no one noticed because it's like undocumented change or whatever. And so that's why I think old talent trees are technically not that what we need, because it's like we have them, kind of, right?
Well, I'm just saying, like why are we like these all these systems that don't really, I think, make the game cooler, in my opinion, just feel like they're kind of wasting their time a little bit. Like I don't think anyone loves soulbind traits. Maybe there's 1 or 2 that are fun to play with, but at least from a DPS perspective. I think some of the utility ones are really fun and interesting. Those are cool. But the DPS ones are all like, well, here's 3% main stat if you stand still. It's like, okay, sure.
It was like that for years, right? The first like 3 or vanilla and the 2 expansions, or maybe Keta as well. It was like you have the basic kit, and then you get like tier sets on top of it, and some legendaries, and that was like enough. Why you put like extra systems on top of it as well? Yeah. It's just too much. And I think they noticed it in BFA, where you like needed essences to like solve everything that was before. And now they're like, as I understand it, was like they like front loaded everything. So they put in like 5 systems at first and never added any system again for the rest of the expansion. So that we can, but doesn't change the point, right? At the end of the expansion, systems go away. So what is the balancing right now worth when we like lose like 50-60% of what we have?
And it's much harder. It's much harder to balance. And I think when you give, it's kind of interesting, right? When you give players more choices that are independent of each other, so we have soulbinds, conduits, legendaries, talents. When you give us all of that different stuff, you actually limit choice from a min-max perspective, because there's a greater possibility that multiplying all those things together just gets out of control.
Everything that works together, right? Yeah.
But if it was just talents times legendaries, or just one system addition, it's much easier to have choice, because, well, things can't be multiplying off each other and playing off all the different strengths and things like that, which, like, some would argue is more boring. But now we have the current Shadowplane Prism build with ShadowPriest. You know, we have a legendary that affects Mindbender and damage versus when you cast more Mind Blast and Shadow Word Deaths. We have some talents that directly buff that, like Mindbender indirectly buffs that. So now you always take Mindbender. Death and Manus and Mythic Plus works really well with that too. So you almost always take that Mythic Plus.
I love that.
Spiteful Weeks, Explosive Weeks, right? Night Fae with Fae Guardians, right? You get better Void Form uptime, so you have more Mind Blast into it. So again, now you're starting to lock in the Covenant. So the problem is when you add all of these systems that, you know, are somewhat meaningless and they're not super interesting, I think you actually hurt the choices that you can make. Because before, without any of these systems in like alpha or beta, people were like, oh yeah, I can try out this talent for this boss, or I'll switch this around or whatever. But now as we've gotten the full systems, the choices that we do make has actually gone down quite significantly, because people have realized, well, no, these combinations are just so good together. Not using them is a much bigger loss than it should be, which is unfortunate. But you know, I can only say too much, because Shadowplane Prism is a lot of fun, so I don't want to crap on it too much. But yeah,
you did mention that, you know, most of the specs have dead talents. Now, what can we look at ShadowPriest right now that is an absolute dead talent? And I wouldn't like just call it out. It's like, okay, how could this talent be made to work?
Competitive.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of those, right? And I think I would almost classify dead talents as also the ones that always get taken. I think those are pretty dangerous, right? Like, there are talents that we just never change in almost any circumstance, and I think those are really dangerous. The best row that we have is the level 30 row with Twist of Fate, Misery, and Searing Nightmare. Like, that choice is, I think, really good, and they nailed it there. Obviously, tuning can be kind of weird, but it's pretty solid. I would say the utility talents are definitely our worst ones. So the level 25 row is pretty meh. Level 35 row, pretty meh. Yeah, you know, it's a hard way to put the spec, because it's like, well, do you want to give the spec baseline movement? Do you want to give every spec in the game that? Maybe not everyone should. Like, we have to talent into it. Not most people don't.
Well, then everyone should be movement, right? Based.
You know, it's hard to really say it.
Everybody's going to ask for it for sure. I mean,
we're going into the homogeneous and
yeah. See, fucking word, man. Homogenization
issue that we had before, that they wanted to stray from when they designed it. Just like, okay, we want things to feel special. So it kind of seems like this endless loops. Like, okay, we want things to feel special, but in order for them to be balanced, they kind of have to be the same. So okay. I guess that balance is just very hard for them to strike, and
it'd be hard for anyone to do, right? And I think Stan actually mentioned this a little bit, and I've been preaching this for a while. I think, like we have PvP talents for PvP, I think we need Mythic Plus talents. I think we might need raid talents.
Oh yeah,
that would be interesting.
Just the tuning up, right? Extra tuning up would be perfect.
I'll add to this, not the current PvP talents. I would go for the Legion PvP talents. No, seriously, Because that was this. What we haven't had some bullshit. Like 5 things you can not. The old ones were actually like full-on talents you would pick for PvP. I would love that. That's a great.
I
idea.
like the old system that you had to level through and pick.
Yeah,
just the
every time.
amount
Like the second time was the best time, right? Living through it and losing
I'm just saying
everything.
the concept of it,
great.
but not.
But I think like
idea is good.
that's the way that they can solve balancing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is you have selective choices that only work in parts of the game, which they've been trying to avoid for years. But I think it's kind of, especially if they want Mythic Plus balance to really be a thing, which they've ignored it for the past 4
It
years.
grows more and more, right? It's
And they need a better and you know, so the problem here is an example. I really want Mind Bomb to be a stun again. It was an AoE stun that had a little bit of a short delay. The problem is it's already on a row with a single target stun that people really love in PvP. So they don't want to add another AoE stun and a single target stun. Like that's a weird choice. Like why wouldn't you always pick the
just
AoE
make
one or
fear
whatever?
not break. What do you think about that?
Just make what?
Fear not break.
Well, yeah, that'd be overpowered, probably. I don't know. I mean, the
In
way that they
PvP,
have-
that
this is
would be
the
a
problem, right? Like,
nightmare.
I hate trying to give them ideas for things when I don't know the PvP world as much, right? So it's difficult to say like, yeah, how do you balance a talent across PvP, raids, Mythic Plus, and open world, and RBGs, right? RBGs versus arena, right? It's almost impossible.
Yep.
It's
And
yeah.
you get what we have today. Half everything is dead. You never take it.
But what's
And
have it like simple, right? That's like the same ability works in every scenario. That you can like pick up PvP when you don't know anything about it, right? You can play it, but technically change the ability, like, yeah, it's hard. It's getting
It's
too
difficult, yeah.
complicated, right? That's her point.
So it's kind of like my argument is if you want to design a talent that is directly like, yeah, this is a PvP talent, like, okay, put it in the PvP talents, right? Or give them an extra option and now there's 4 or whatever it means. I don't know. But I think like it's difficult when they're like, you look at this row. I dislike when there's a talent row that's like, yep, that's the PvP choice, that's the raid choice, and this is the never take choice. You know, I'd rather I have 3 raid choices. And that's, you know, selfishly, or I'd rather have 3 Mythic Plus choices.
Totally agree on that. Totally agree on that.
I think this issue started to become more and more apparent after Legion with the addition of Mythic Plus, because until Legion, dungeons outside of challenge modes, I think they were just like, okay, I want to raid, oh, let me get a couple of gear pieces from dungeons and then I can actually go into the raid. Dungeons were never really end game content as far as I can remember, and you really only had PvP and raiding, right? You could argue that BGs were a thing, but I don't know if anybody took BGs seriously since what, Kata rated BGs, where
I would say what to
or what maybe, and now you
Are they still in the game though?
yeah, it's a good question.
now you clearly have 3 major distinct game systems. The way to play the game, you basically have raid and myth and dungeons and arenas. All 3 are kind of impacting each other's balance, right?
I'll just add to what you were saying. I saw a tweet from what was the name? JDot?
JRB?
JB?
Yeah, so he basically tweeted, and this could potentially happen if Riot were to look at the Mythic Plus gameplay in WoW and make a separate MMO, a separate player-based, team-based MMO on just Mythic Plus, they'll fuck WoW up, and they would be able to do it properly. And I feel,
yeah, I mean, Mythic Plus is kind of an afterthought right now for them. You know, for it's a hard thing to balance and get, but you can definitely tell like the raid encounters, and I'm not sure if you guys have looked at the raid bosses.
oh yeah,
They look amazing. They look
yes,
They look
Oh,
really
yes.
fun
so
mechanically
good.
and visually, right? Unfortunately, I don't feel the same way about the dungeons, and I don't really know why. Either from a class balance perspective or just the dungeons being fun. I don't know. But unironically, I think the Legion dungeons were actually my favorite so far in the kind of Mythic Plus system. Like the first time, I thought like those were my favorite. Personally.
First time
like
is always good.
Do you like the meta where like the tank runs around collecting everything and you like AoEing down, or?
I mean, yeah, who doesn't? That's a lot of fun. Who doesn't love to AoE 100 mobs at a time? Like, yeah, like
Hope you're
reaping
not
was
AoE
really
capped.
silly.
100
it was
mobs.
fun. Well, obviously now we can't do that because everyone has capped AoE, but you know,
It's fun for a
you know.
season, right? But like for 2 years.
Yeah, maybe. You know, it's kind of, you know, do you want it to be a competition or do you want to have fun with it? Like you can't always have both.
It could be
so
challenging
it's
as well,
difficult.
right? And it's
Yeah.
like it is challenging at the point, but it's like a bit, I don't know.
Yeah,
When
I mean,
you
that's
not do it like that, it's the optimal way to do it. But when you not do it like that, you're like totally screwed sometimes because it's not even possible. That's too much, right, of a difference.
But that's the funny part, right? Because if it's possible for everyone, it actually removes some of the challenging bits.
There should be some challenge. Yeah,
Not that I liked them necessarily, but it was.
Maybe because Shadow AoE was not so good then.
Shadow AoE was pretty bad in Legion, but I would say the fun part about Legion dungeons at a high level, because I could swap my gear around, right? So I could have a legendary on for this pack, and then for single target, go my single target build, right? Or like, hey, this boss hits really hard, I'm gonna put on my defensive talents and gear, right? I could make those choices pack by pack, and I love that. Obviously they didn't. They removed it.
It was too much choice, right?
There's too much choice. Yeah. So now what's interesting is the classes that are really good in Mythic Plus are still the ones that have great utility, which is not Shadow Priest.
And no AoE cap.
And well, no AoE cap, or they can get everything without having sacrifices, right? Like they can make a talent selection where they have
AoE
dominant AoE and good single target, right? And you know that's the only reason why they're bringing Shadow Priest and MTI is to buff the mage that can do all that.
we were going to go to
or
this.
the Holy Paladin, but not anymore.
No.
I think
you can give fake guardians away also, right? So
yeah.
I think what you said about JB's post kind of rings true, because if you really look at how at least multiplayer games seem to have developed over the years, and obviously how well developed over the years, it's becoming less and less predominant where people just want to go through the stress of having 20 people to do raid. Although raiding, I feel, is one of the coolest things that you can do in WoW. It's easier to get a dungeon group going because sometimes it's the meta. It's not the meta. It's the 2021, let's say, mentality of look, okay, I want to log into the game and I want to play now. I have like 30 minutes to an hour time to squeeze in a couple of games.
Dose.
Yeah, the quick dose, the quick matches, stuff like that. And Mythic Plus kind of fits that into it that better. So maybe what JB said has some truth to it. But then again, we go into the other side of it, where the way San mentioned, you get a new raid every patch. You might get a new dungeon every patch, but you still have all the old dungeons. So regardless if they're fun or not, they do get stale a little bit after 2 years. So the affixes, I guess, is maybe the only thing that they can do to keep them a little bit fresh. And unless they go crazy with affixes, like what probably the best one they've made in terms of design are, let's say, what was it?
Prideful is pretty great, I will say.
I think they limit their choice, right, in the dungeons where you have to go and stuff.
I wanted to pitch you guys this because we did talk about the legendaries and everything coming for Shadow in 9.1. We didn't really talk about the nerfs, which might seem big, might not seem big, depending on what your perspective is. And you guys did put the dot on the I that Shadow was. I don't know if it was ever a single target monster, because the way it's designed, you would think that you want to multi-dot so you can funnel all that power into like one target, kind of like how Elemental is, maybe how Balance is as well. But obviously, Devouring Plague was nerfed, and Shadow Word Pain and Vampiric Touch were buffed. How do you guys see this going into 9.1? Obviously, the raid encounters matter. But how do you think like would affect the playstyle in general? Would it?
I think it's great, actually. I love it.
Really?
No. Yeah, I know it's kind of weird. People don't really like nerfs or buffs or changes. Our single target was too good relative to others, and that's always a dangerous spot to be in. And I think our multi-dotting was terrible. Generally, is like one of the worst, especially if they're not stacked. And so I like that this is almost play for play what we would have suggested on the Warcraft Priest team of like nerfing Devouring Plague and buffing dots here is the way to go about this, right? And we lost 3% on single target. Like who cares? That's a soulbind rate. And then we gained, it's like starting at 3 targets and above, we gained like 1 or 2% per target. Up to as long as we can keep maintaining our dots, right? Which honestly is a pretty healthy trade-off in my opinion. We got a little bit of multi-target of spread target damage, and we lost a little bit of single target to compensate. Like, I think it's great. I think it's awesome.
Can you remember the changes to the dot duration where they like decreased it?
Yeah.
And I feel they did it with like we have like 2 minutes on some bosses because like with Void Eruption, how it works in Legion, it got like refreshed so much that it was like insane. And I think it's fine to like reduce it at that point. Also, like that it's not only with what was it, like 2 seconds now instead of 3 seconds duration
On Void Bolt,
increase on Void Bolt, yeah.
Yeah,
And-
it's also kind of you are.
But I think they
refreshing your
should
dots.
like increase the dot duration at this point right now.
Yeah, I think they
Just a
definitely
tiny bit.
could stand to do that it'd make the spec a bit easier to play for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think overall, like the changes in 9.1 from that perspective are okay. I was slightly concerned when I first saw them, and this is kind of the struggle with balancing anything these days, is making one change has domino effects later down. So
It reverberates.
unfortunately, by nerfing Devouring Plague, they also nerfed one of our conduits that no one picked. So which is kind of funny. I'm sure that wasn't intended,
Not a
but it was
big
like
loss.
our worst conduit. Oh yeah, they nerfed it effectively with this, which is funny. And that's the Mind Devourer conduit. And then the other thing I was worried about was Devouring Plague is not our only insanity spender. From the old Shadow Orb days, it was the only one, but now it's not. Now we also have Searing Nightmare. And so I was slightly concerned or worried that nerfing Devouring Plague too much could cause it to get removed in favor of Searing Nightmare on 2 targets. Thankfully, that's not the case from what we've seen, so that's good. But yeah, other than that, honestly, I thought that the change was fine. They also nerfed our best conduit, which I think we saw coming. And then they nerfed our top 2 legendaries. So there is if you kind of put everything together, they made quite a bit of changes.
But we scaled pretty good, right? So it's like,
we scale pretty well, which is nice. And fortunately, it does kind of, with the 9.1 power gains we're getting, it does kind of start evening itself out. Like, yes, they nerfed our best conduit, but now we get a 3rd conduit slot for free in 9.1, right? But there's no choice there. Everyone gets it, regardless of your path and your soulbind, which is great for us, especially if we keep taking Shadowflame Prism, because we can slot in Rabid Shadows in that slot, which is great. With Shadowflame
I
Prism
run
and
it right
Mindbender.
now sometimes. Yeah.
So it's kind of all of these changes kind of coming together, and if you look at where we are right now and where we're going to be in 9.1, we're going to be pretty dang close to where we are on single target and a little bit better on multi-target, which is great. Unfortunately, our Covenant choices might get a little foggy, but that just depends on the legendaries we don't have yet. So
There's probably a lot more things to be changed on the PTR. So I
Let's
guess
hope so.
yeah, we're talking a lot on what is to come, but people should take all of this with a little bit of grain of salt, because nothing is final yet. And we mentioned on the Dispriest podcast too, a lot of the tooltips you read right now on the PTR don't actually work as they read.
Some of them are not even implemented.
It's
in
a
the
mess
game.
over there. But one thing is for certain, the raid is pretty incredible. I was going to address something to you guys that will come out maybe from the perspective of a more casual player that is interested on trying out Shadow Priest and wanting to get into it. I kind of do this on every podcast. Like, what would be like, I don't know, some
Just back in the game, tried.
yeah, okay, well that's definitely, everybody's sold on that. But like, if you would have some quick TP advice, something to say to a player who's maybe afraid to get into Shadow Priest, he saw the reworks, he saw all the many buttons or whatever, feels a little bit afraid, what would you say to a new player? It's like, hey man, this is how you should start it off with Shadow and take it from here.
They're like the best guide series ever on the channel. You can watch that and you understand everything about Shadow in like less than a few hours, man. It's so crazy. Thanks. For
if you want everything, yeah, I would say that I think Shadow exists in a space right now that's kind of hybrid between a lot of different things. If you play Affliction right now, you have so many dots, it can be kind of feel like you're juggling all the time, and it can be kind of overwhelming, especially on a fight like Denathrius or other things. Shadow doesn't have that. You only really have 2 dots, realistically, and then you have a spender dot, which is you kind of just throw that sucker out there. And the beauty of the way the spec plays is it's way harder to screw up now than it used to be, which I think is a great benefit there. If you hit your stuff on cooldown, you're generally speaking gonna be okay, which is a big change from how it used to be. With the way that our mastery works and the way that Devouring Plague rolls its damage over when you recast it, I think it's a much easier spec to kind of jump into and just kind of go nuts with. Like, and the other fun part, take the talents that sound cool. You'll probably still do good damage because the cool ones are the ones we take all the time, in most cases, which I think is fun. So I would just say try it out and, you know, make Shadow Flame Prism and you're going to have a ton of fun in Torghast and Mythic Plus, I promise you. I think that's the other kind of interesting part about playing an alt these days is you will be in Torghast quite a bit with them. And I would argue Shadow Priest might be one of the most fun specs in Torghast right now. We have some crazy fun powers, in my opinion. So if you haven't tried it out,
destroy bosses as well,
yeah, absolutely destroy bosses. Twisting Quarters is really easy, especially now with the new powers. So yeah, man, try it out.
Cool. All right, and now we're getting to that fun part because you know we're gonna get a little bit into a creative space. I know San got into it a little bit, but now we'll just break it free here. So here's the image, right? You're basically working at Blizzard, right? Ian is still in charge, but he comes up to you and says, "Hey, San, Publik, you're in charge of developing Shadow Priest. You don't worry about balancing or anything. Just either bring me a brand new ability for Shadow that could possibly fix some things, or look into the past and bring something from the past that, you know, would make the flavor better or fix something." Now, you can take your time and think about it. I'll cut the shit out from the video, or you can just go.
Actually, I don't like the tentacles come out of you. I want the demon form or something bigger, like a void form-ish, void walker kind of thing. That would be like better. Just like seeing that.
Like a void walker form.
Yeah,
so you would like
I would like that
actual
more,
form
actually.
for your character? So like when you go into the void form to actually be like a big void monstrosity?
And also like dotting everything around you. Like you press that button and you get like
Everybody gets.
It was so great in Legion where you have like you could put up all your dots on the targets and then you like spread your AoE, and that was really fun. It was not tuned very good, but it was very fun. I like that. Yeah.
If I had to say, I have like 3 things that I would do day one.
Ooh, okay.
Mind Bomb should stun again. That's easy. I want a new talent that's basically a black hole talent. Kind of
Black
looks
hole?
like Ursul's. Yeah, it kind of works like Ursul's Vortex in a way where you can place something on the ground and then tentacles grip things that try to leave that area.
Hey, we used to Shadow Priest used to have that. There was a talent like this. What was it?
There was an
in
NPC
what?
that had an ability like this, but
There was never a talent like that.
I
There
don't
was in
think there was a
PvP.
talent
I
like that.
remember specifically there was something that would root with. You would
maybe.
root people.
There were items in Legion where you have like 10 minutes void forms that never like drained. That was like,
Oh, okay, never mind. I'll get to it. I'll find it because I remember playing against Shadow Priest and I hated that. Sorry, go ahead.
The last thing that I would add, I would remove all the Covenant abilities in the game. I would remove all Soulbinds and Conduits. And instead, I would make the Covenants a cosmetic choice. And that would be it.
yes, please, cosmetic choice.
I've been talking about this forever, and I think the player base would all agree with me. If you remove the Covenant abilities, put them in the talent row if you must, make them baseline, I don't really care.
You can
and the
choose one, yeah.
Choose one, sure. The Covenant choice becomes cosmetic, right? And everyone would go ballistic. So Shadow Priest is an easy example compared to other specs, but the Covenant choice determines your color of Void Form, right? If you're Venthyr, your Void Form is now red. If you're Necrolord, now it's like green and poisony, right?
I mean, I would love that
That
shit.
would be so great.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome. It looked
Yes.
awesome.
Yes.
And everyone would love it way more than what we have today. So that's the third thing I would do.
Cosmetics, yes, because I keep bringing this up and I still cannot fucking explain to myself why they're not putting cosmetic rewards on prestigious and difficult content like they had the Mage Tower. Look how successful the Mage Tower was, and all you got was cosmetics. And if you would have asked me this in 7.3.5, it's like, oh, are they gonna keep Mage Tower? It's like, for sure, man. Look how good this is. Everybody loves it, and it just kind of went away. And this kind of ties into everything. Or Blizzard.
Remember, you have Torghast.
Well, at first, not everyone liked it, right? So
Why you do this to me, man?
If content isn't controversial, then is it really content?
It's content right now is controversial as well. So,
to that extent, maybe the way Sen said that he doesn't like tentacles. I like tentacles, and not because I like anime, but because when initially
It is because you like anime.
no,
Just that
you
you
never watched Tentacles anime, man. Don't talk to me like that.
don't call anime, man.
Do people forget that we have glyphs in the game? Like,
Yeah.
There's a whole design space out there for glyphs, right?
Yeah.
Why is
Yeah,
there
just
not a
change
glyph?
Yeah,
it.
because man, they can be
Color,
rewards.
Whatever, just change it. Yeah.
Like every
Like-
covenant could give you a glyph that changes your shadow form, right? There could be a glyph to remove the tentacles if you want it for something else, right? Like they have all these like glyphs exist in the game. Inscriptionists would love it if you had new glyphs in 9.2, right? Like everyone would love that. And
They rather spend time developing systems that they got rid of 2 years ago.
and I promise you, if for every system they add, it's gonna make specs less interesting. I almost guarantee it. So
Right.
Yeah.
and
And
balance is gonna be
I-
harder, so.
Just wanted to circle back a little bit onto San's idea because I want to get a bit more specific with it. I know he mentioned that, increase the range and maybe, spread dots on everybody. Would that be like the final thing? Like when you pop into that big voidy form you mentioned, San? So you have an increase range and apply dots to anything? Or
I
would
hate
it-
that mobs has to stand like 10 yards away for Searing Nightmare, for example.
Right.
There are some tanks they try, but the mobs don't agree on that plan, I guess.
Yeah, our AoE is in a really weird spot. Like Steering Nightmare is a very strong talent, but it's not very fun for a lot of people. So.
Also, it's with the legendary, right? With Mindbender, it feels
It's awkward, yeah.
It just feels awkward.
Speaking of this, I did have something in mind that I kind of always wanted to pitch to a lot more experienced Shadow players, because as a non-Shadow Priest player myself, this is the first thing that caught my eye, because I'm a little bit fucked up in the head. When I saw the Shadow Priest concept of going crazy, insane, and so obviously Surrender to Madness played a big role into that. Tentacles or not, it felt like this really nice class design that whenever they added Surrender to Madness that no other spec had, and I'm all into making specs feel unique, like the way Demon Hunter has momentum and using mobility to deal damage. Shadow Priest could have this design path where you could just have no cap to how much damage you can do, which I think is kind of how Legion was, although it was a little bit crazy. Maybe the balancing and tuning can kind of fix that, but I feel like with the concept of Shadow being a spec that as you play it you go more and more insane, do you guys feel like they could take that design into something that's crazy and open up new avenues? Like, I don't know if Surrender to Madness is still used a little bit right now, because I know it was used a little bit earlier. I don't know if you guys can touch a little bit about that. What do you feel about Surrender to Madness? Do you think this is like a good design for Shadow Priest? Because I've heard also other people saying like, I don't like this insanity stuff. I just like the old Shadow Priest style. But I kind of feel like this insanity stuff is bringing a lot of flavor to the spec. What do you guys think about all of that?
Let me say something about it, and you can ramble for the public then.
Sure.
So it's hard because it's a talent, right? So it's always you need to choose it, right? So the other talents need to be like less important. And Hungering Void is a very, very strong talent. Right now, with all the single target damage we do, it's like very prevalent. I don't know if it changed like after. Maybe there is some room for that on some bosses where you can use it, where you have ads or something. And the problem was also with Night Fae, because Void Form is like when you reduce it, you have it like often enough for example in dungeons, and Surrender to Madness was only good in dungeons most of the time because you have more Void Form uptime, and the single target damage was not so important. But the problem with Night Fae was you didn't need another Void Form because you cannot even spend it, right? So there is like very niche situation and also like very competitive talent that it gets against. So it's hard to choose there. But like the old one was so too good, just because there was nothing else that like was comparable to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think we have two talents on that row, Ancient Madness and Hungering Void, that directly buff all Void forms, right? And Fake Guardians gives you more Void Form uptime. So you get more uptime and you buff the Void Forms at the same time. Whereas if you take Surrender to Madness, you're just adding more uptime to already more uptime, and you get some diminishing returns there because then your cooldowns aren't always synced up. Like one of the reasons why we have such a strong single target, strong burst is because we put, Void Eruption, Fake Guardians with Nia's Soulbind traits, Power Infusion, Mindbender, all in the little window. And you get good results with that. But when you start spreading those cooldowns out, it becomes less good. So Surrender does kind of struggle in that kind of design space because of how strong Hungering Void and Fake Guardians is, or Ancient Madness and Fake Guardians and Mythic Plus. So I think like that's definitely challenging. I would say I actually love the current version of Surrender. I think they did a really good job of putting it in a spot where it's not required. because that was the big problem in Emerald Nightmare, right? It was so good, it was required. Which is good and bad. I think it's a struggle because it made the spec much harder to play, and well, harder to get into for sure, and way more of a punishing spec. But man, was it fun! I mean, you can't deny that if you got it, you were rocking and rolling, it was fun. I had to play like classical music to keep my heart rate down. It was still fun.
Yeah, but okay.
One second and you're dead. When you're not pressing that button, you're hoping for your latency not drop or something.
Hopefully you don't have bad latency, right?
Obviously,
it was a lot of fun. Like I won't deny that it's a lot of fun, but it had no place being in this game. It's unbounceable. It's either brokenly overpowered, or it's in the current state it's in now, where no one takes it. You know, like that kind of mechanic where the risk reward is so high, it needs to be overpowered. And then the problem with that is, as you mentioned earlier, the trickle down is real, right? When you see videos of great Shadow Priest players like Bicklin doing massive Surrender to Madnesses, every Shadow Priest in the real world will feel pressured to only play Surrender all the time. And I think that kind of creates a little bit of a toxicity in the spec, especially for like heroic raid guilds or whatever that are like, well, why aren't you as good as Bicklin? It's like, well, my latency sucks. Like, I don't care. Like, just be better. You know, like, it's, and that loop is difficult. And so I liked where they put Surrender to Madness in Shadowlands, but unfortunately it has some anti-synergy with other things in the game, like Covenant abilities, unfortunately, that makes Surrender less of a thing to pick. Because truthfully, you could easily have used it on like Stone Legion generals or other fights that have like waves of ads coming in. Should be like bread and butter for that talent. But because of this, the anti-synergy effectively with Night Fae, you don't really see it at all.
So the main problem that I hear you guys mentioning is that it kind of conflicts with Void Form. Do you see, because and you mentioned it really well, Surrender to Madness has gone through a different iteration every expansion, right? Since they've added it, kind of. So obviously they don't really know what to do with it, but it's I personally feel like it's a really good concept, and I actually agree with you. But obviously not everybody agrees with this. If it's super challenging and super hard and punishing, but also rewarding, isn't that what can make something really fun and engaging to play? Obviously not everybody thinks like that.
For sure.
But do you see, because you had some really good creative answers for us, but do you see them designing Surrender to Madness in a world where it's not tied to Void Form? Maybe it can add a different spin to the spec that's not necessarily tied to Void Form. Maybe would replace Void Form and give you something else that can also.
I'd love to test those out, you know, and I think there are options. I think they're scared, honestly.
They're not taking big risks. No.
I think there could be a spot when haste levels grow higher and higher. Maybe there could be a place for that to work at the end of the expansion.
Honestly, I think it should be a Torghast thing.
I think they should get rid of it by now.
Well, they could just get rid of it or put it somewhere else on the talent row. But I think if you want to have that in the game, I think it should go in someplace like Torghast.
Or make it baseline, right?
They could make a baseline, right? Be kind of interesting. It's difficult. I think if they put it in Torghast and they effectively gave you an anima power in Torghast that buffed Surrender to be what it was at the start of Legion, that'd be really fun. Like, what if you did a whole Torghast?
That lived that long, man.
But you could do a whole Torghast floor with one Void Form. Like, that sounds awesome. Add in the ramping mechanic as Torghast anima power. Like, that's what I love about Torghast, is that balance doesn't matter. Although I think Blizzard kind of disagrees, but like, put those kinds of things and give everyone that moment of awesomeness, right? Put a crazy risk reward power as an anima power in Torghast. There's no downside to doing that. Like, who cares if Torghast isn't balanced? Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, go nuts.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the design space of like high risk reward that's really fun to play with.
They should have a reason.
Stuff like that.
They should have a reason to not do that, right? It's like they've done it in beta, right? For some point. So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we can,
for the servers. Maybe that's like too much power they need for that. I don't know.
Well, that's the thing, because we can argue that Torghast was the most fun, I think, in early beta alpha, where there was you just did it because it was fun. There was no soul edge, there was nothing in it.
It would get ridiculous.
And everybody just did it because it was fun, and that was a good metric of, okay, people just like to have fun. Sometimes they don't really need player power to be gained from that, and maybe, I don't know, I feel like Blizzard is missing the mark on this one.
Yeah. I hate it more than grinding AP right now.
Yeah, I mean,
that says a lot.
No one can blame you.
Island
It becomes
Expeditions,
so tedious.
Torghast.
Yeah, I think Island Expeditions were better than Torghast.
Even Island was better, yeah.
It's kind of sad.
I mean, it is the truth.
I mean,
yeah.
again, I think they're slowly trying to make it better. Although some of the stuff in 9.1 has me a little worried. But yeah, like I just wanted Torghast to be the place where all the crazy ideas that developers had for class design went there. And
try out new stuff also, right?
Yeah, try out new stuff. And I was sure when they I was like, I guess they were going to do Covenant Legendaries back in 9.0, as I'm sure a lot of people did. And I was sure that they were just going to rip out anima powers, because there are Covenant powers for every Covenant ability inside of Torghast.
Yeah.
I was sure they were just going to rip those out and tune them, and those were going to be the powers. And some of them are really fun, but they didn't really do that for most of them.
Interesting point though. Now that I remember, the season 2 ethics, right, should be some anima powers. Maybe they want them to not be overpowered because they want to use it for that ethics.
If they do that, it's going to be a nightmare. But we'll see.
You're not sure on that? But on the first boss in the raid, right?
Yeah, putting anima powers in the Raider dungeons is
Terragru is already.
Did you try Terragru, Publik? Because
I did not get a chance to.
You have anima powers, baby.
That's the thing, because Terragru, at least the way we tried it, we tested it yesterday in Mythic. You really need it, and that iteration. I don't know how they're gonna change it once they're releasing it. You really need
some specific ones,
and you got random power, so it was a lot of chore of running around. Okay, your powers, let's pick them up.
The
Terragru
boss.
Like, try the boss, wipe when you not have the right one, and try again, or what?
I don't know how it's gonna work on live, but on PTR, like we tried a couple of times. Like, okay, not enough people have the immune to fear and stun. Okay, let's run around Rosie again and still choose the powers. And it's
why they actually think that is fun. What the fuck is wrong?
So the anima powers themselves kind of make the fight interesting, at least at the first glance. I don't know how it's gonna be. I don't know how it's gonna be if we're gonna have to do it like after 50 times or after like 3 months. The getting of the powers is annoying because I don't think the powers should feel that mandatory, because once they feel mandatory, that's when it sucks, because the mechanics of the Terragru are actually pretty fun. Some people get feared, some people need to soak X and Y based on the powers, but if you don't have the powers to actually deal with the mechanics, you have to stop raiding and actually reset your powers and go collect them again and hope that through the sheer randomness that the powers gives you the right one. So
there's some pretty broken ones too.
I can see some potential stress in that direction. We'll see.
And the hard part is, I feel like this is the reason why they've been balancing anima powers so much. Like,
maybe.
It's
only for one boss though.
It's all revealing now.
They've been nerfing and buffing powers, and I didn't understand, like, what's the purpose of balancing anima powers in Torghast? Like, I just didn't get it. Like, shouldn't they all just be brokenly overpowered? And then they came out with this boss, and I'm like, oh, that's why.
So I guess we can sleep on Torghast for like 9.2 and come back when it's no longer an issue. They can just make powers.
They can take like 5 or 6 powers from Torghast and like balance them in the raid, and then like go wild on Torghast.
That would be one thing, yeah, for sure.
It's not understandable for people.
I definitely wish it was a shorter list of powers to choose from on the Terragru fight. I think that could be better. Because like you're just kind of RNG. Like, I think hunters right now have some pretty terrible anima powers, like across the board. So like, are hunters just going to be terrible on Terragru just because they don't have good powers to choose from?
Well, they can increase the damage of others, right? That's pretty true.
You'll just
on the mage PI.
You're just gonna give them damage immunes, and they're just gonna do all the mechanics.
True. That's
no damage parses for hunters on Terragru.
Every hunter loves that, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's why you play hunter, right? You want to do
classes
mechanics. Support classes.
Do mechanics, no damage. Yeah, exactly. I think the only thing that I would bring up is just I think we have too much player power right now, and I would just like to be kind of condensed, or however you want to say it. But who knows if they're going to do that. I don't know. And the other thing I'll say is, if anyone for Blizzard watches this or listens to this, or someone else knows someone, work with the community. I love doing these types of things. So I love like talking about this all the time. I would gladly do this for hours and hours with anyone that wants to, just to give feedback, help with discussions, whatever it is. Because I think, truthfully, that's how we're going to get the best game design we can. And I think that's why we got Shadow in such an awesome state, is because the developers were willing to listen and try new things. So
you did a great job there, man.
Yeah, I wanted to point this out as well.
I tried to help, but nothing you left out. So
So it was
Great
amazing.
job, man.
We have to like all Shadow players should like give the proper respect to a man who put up in his time and his passion into it. And I feel at this point, WoW generally needs people like Publik, like San, maybe like Flame, but I don't know. To just
more like me, man.
just have some passion into it, because no fucking Fortnite kids are going to join WoW, man. You have your audience. This is it. This is what you're gonna get. You wanna milk us. Just make the game for us. I'm happily gonna let myself milked, but make it fun for everybody.
You think YouTube's gonna have a problem with that?
It's about milk. So
Yeah, milk is fine.
It's fine, right? Really good point. And that being said, I want to extend my thank you to Mr. San and Mr. Publik for joining and having a cool and actually fun discussion about Shadow and WoW. I think it we covered both side of the tracks pretty cool.
Oh, it was definitely entertaining. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us, and we definitely want to revisit SHADOWPRIEST in 9.1. Hopefully,
yeah. We're gonna do this again, boys.
Has established a little bit, because we don't know if this is the last that we'll see of the tuning of Shadow, and obviously we don't really know exactly how the Necrons Legendary is gonna go. So once things settled in, maybe Covenants will be a little bit more interesting for Shadow. We'll see how it kind of works out in 9.1, and hope you guys are down for more talks like this in the future.
Yeah, and be sure to.
Sure, man. Thanks for
Of course, was an absolute pleasure and honor. And you guys be sure to check out, the links in the description, for the Warcraft Priest, for Publik's guides and resources, Sans streams as well, and other interesting information and useful information there. And with that said, we wish you a great week ahead. Remember, you can catch us every Monday on youtube.com/MarcelianOnline or on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple iTunes, all the streaming podcasting platforms. All of them, I tell you.
All right, everybody, have a good week and see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
People cannot hear the waves, though.
Still I play WoW. Still I play WoW.